Welcome to Beyond Resume, where careers and analytics come alive. This is where we explore the intersection of innovation and human experience, the stories that shape leaders, and the principles that drive success in our field. I am Kaushik, an advanced analytics and AI professional with over 20 years in the industry and a decade of leading high performing teams. Today, I am really pleased to have Lindsay Pellow with us. Lindsay is a data science leader based in the UK with an impressive 25 years of experience in this field. Our paths crossed over a decade ago, back in 2013, where we were working for HSBC, supporting their UK retail business. It was a short stint working together, but Lindsay's leadership left a lasting impression on me. She was one of the most loved leaders I have ever encountered. And what stood out was her combination of sharp business acumen, strong technical skills, and genuine care for people. Lindsay has built deep expertise in leveraging data to enhance visitor experience and engagement. She has also been building data-driven strategies for audience development and measuring the impact of exhibitions and programs through analytics. That intersection of data science and human experience is exactly what this podcast is all about. Lindsay, welcome to Beyond Resume. It's great to reconnect with you.
Well, thank you for having me, Kaushik, and also for such a kind introduction. As you say, we've known each other for a while now, so it's really great to reconnect, and particularly to talk about the human experience in relation to our industry, which, can often be overlooked.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to the next 20-30 minutes by interacting and understanding few of these critical elements from you, Lindsay. Let me start with the origin. Like 25 years is a pretty long journey in this field. Could you take me back to the beginning? Like how did you find your way into data science and analytics? Like what was it about this work that captured your interest so early on?
Yeah, 25 years, how to make me feel old. I'm definitely one of those people who fell into data. As originally, I actually wanted to be a doctor, but after not getting the right grades in my A levels, that was twice as I resat them to try again, I decided to study maths at university as that was the subject I'd enjoyed the most. Then after that, I genuinely had no idea what to do. And then it's quite an interesting story. So my mum, who worked in the call centre of a home shopping company, she saw a job advert on the notice board, like a printed advert, for an operational research analyst, which said you needed a maths degree or similar. So she brought it home that day, and that was actually the closing date. So I rang up and asked if I could pop my application through the door over the weekend, as this was a Friday, and they said, yes, you can. So
That's cutting it close. So your mom literally brought you the job that started your career.
I know, yeah, I must remind her of that actually. Yeah, so over that weekend, I did a CV, and again, showing my age a bit, this was actually on an electronic typewriter I borrowed from a friend of mine, as we didn't have a computer at home. And then I posted it through the door of the head office on the Sunday. And the hiring manager, who's actually still a friend of mine, he told me this format actually made it stand out a bit, which again is, quite funny. And then when I went for the interview, honestly, I still didn't really know what operational research was. But luckily, they had a test, and I did that first. And that test was all about using data to solve a real business challenge. And that challenge was about reducing fraud. So essentially, where customers were saying their goods hadn't been delivered, You have to remember this was the year 2000, before every single parcel was tracked digitally. And I also understood the issue, as I also had a weekend job for this company in the same call centre where my mum worked back when I was in the sixth form.
So that's very interesting, and so you could speak to the problem from your actual experience in that case, right?
Exactly, yeah. And this test really captured my interest. That idea of using maths to solve real problems. So then when it came to the interview itself and they asked me a question, what does operational research mean to you? I was then able to give a decent answer, essentially because of this test they'd set. And then I got the job, and the rest is history. So a very serendipitous start, really. It was obviously meant to be.
Absolutely. Just a follow-up, Lindsay, that you mentioned you wanted to be a doctor originally, right? So, do you see any connection between that aspiration and what you eventually ended up doing in data? Maybe both are about solving problems and helping people in some way?
Yeah, I've thought about this quite a lot over the years, and I think you're right. There are definitely parallels. Both use data to solve problems, and both require people skills. And I think it's really interesting to see now how data is used in healthcare, from say the use, or some would say misuse, of data through the pandemic recently, to the adoption of AI more recently to improve diagnostics.
No, no, completely agree. Completely agree. Lindsay, just moving to the tougher aspect of, maybe I believe all of us go through 25 years. You have navigated so many changes in this field. I'm curious about maybe a moment that stands out to you, a time when you faced something really challenging, or maybe experienced a breakthrough that shifted how you think about data science or leadership.
It's a great question. I can't immediately think of a data science example, as it feels like data has really evolved with me, from the early days of working on a mainframe and having to go and collect a physical printout of my code results, through to today where everything is so immediate. And in terms of leadership, I really think I evolved into that too. But I did have a pretty huge breakthrough when I was at the co-op, which was really about understanding the power of communication and understanding. So at the cooperative group, we had several standalone businesses. There was supermarkets, there was an insurance business, and a funeral care business. And that was all underpinned by a central membership scheme. So at the time, I was heading up data science for membership. And we'd identified that we really needed to bring data together from all these businesses, as we knew who our members were, but not if they'd had relationships with those individual businesses as well. And to me, it was a no-brainer that this should happen. But looking back, there was a pretty major clue, which was that it hadn't actually been achieved before.
Right, right. So if it was such a no-brainer, then why had not anyone done it yet? That should have been a sign.
I know, right? Yeah. I mean, in my excitement over the benefits, I missed that obvious sign. So I arranged a meeting with the insurance manager whose buy-in I really needed, put across all my points as to why this single customer view was such a great idea. But while I could list off the benefits for her business unit, I hadn't yet considered the work she and her team would need to do to make it happen, such as governance or, their own existing workload and business priorities. And then, to put it bluntly, she wiped the floor with me. And quite rightly, I remember turning to my team member after the meeting and saying something like, well, that's me told.
Oh, that must be a humbling moment for you.
It really was, yeah. And the result was that I learned that, to truly lead a project, I needed to understand the impact on people and their existing workload and processes, and then communicate how I would work with them to help solve those rather than just focusing on the outcomes. So I did that work, spoke to that leader again, and we moved forward to complete the single customer view, with a great working relationship. And I'd say that experience stuck with me, and I'd like to say I've never made that mistake again.
So you have never made that mistake. And how do you approach the cross-functional projects differently now? I mean, what's your process for understanding the impact on other teams before you even pitch an idea?
So yeah, I became more strategic really. I'm more aware of that bigger picture, less just focused on my area, if that makes sense. And I started to think, several steps ahead. What does a problem look like across the business? What are the impacts, both now and in the future, on both objectives and resources across all teams? And then what is the optimum solution to a problem for the overall business objectives, both in an immediate and future sense? And also accepting that this might not be the favoured solution to one team or another, meaning compromises are needed, which brings again in the communication element, being able to bring teams along with you in that strategic vision. And then this actually came in really handy in my last role, where I was responsible for the data strategy across the whole organisation, and where that strategy was heavily tech focused, which both tends to impact all teams, and as an obvious data link in the successful implementation of any new tool or system needs to be underpinned by good data to have the desired impact. So a large part of my role was using my experience and knowledge of the business to help plan and deliver that implementation strategy in the most optimum way.
No, this is an excellent example that you just shared, Lindsay, and I would request the listeners to put extra focus on this segment where you might have a brilliant idea, but how to take up that particular idea to implementation actually requires a lot of working with stakeholders, people who might or might not be from your domain and background. I appreciate you sharing that in detail. Now, Lindsay, we will focus on the technical part of the discussion. Now, your work around visitor experience, audience development, and measuring impact through analytics is really fascinating. I mean, it's not the typical corporate analytics use case, at least to my experience. Now, can you talk about what you are seeing in this space? Like, how are you thinking about using data to enhance human experience, whether that's in exhibitions, programs, or any other context?
Sure. I've worked in retail, food service, financial services, and affiliate marketing. And to be honest, they have all been pretty similar. Ultimately, we're trying to get customers to buy more or use more products. With businesses grappling with whether you can focus on both recruitment through, say, introductory offers and retention through some sort of loyalty offering at the same time, when, of course, there isn't an infinite amount of marketing or tech budget to spend. So the biggest change, I think, is the closer alignment of data and technology. So, back when I first started out working for that home shopping company with physical catalogues that would be sent to customers and a call centre, which they would phone up, to make an order. You could pay for your goods over 20 weeks, and with a lot of consumers unable to gain credit elsewhere, the only real competition was other catalogue companies. And then fast forward less than 20 years, and that company no longer has a physical catalogue and is, I think, the UK's biggest online retailer. Still offering credit, but with competition from pretty much everywhere. It's similar with financial services, with customers mainly self-serving online, and having so much more choice.
That's an incredible transformation. I mean, from physical catalogs to the UK's biggest online retailer. So the customer experience fundamentally changed, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that customer experience now is mainly driven by technology, and the businesses who are truly doing it well are using data to inform the technology and understand it. And then in another previous organisation, I've seen this work not so well, when new technology was driven only by the tech department and some crucial things were potentially going to be missed. So, for example, they'll be able to see how many customers had done or not done thing X, but crucially not which customers. So this meant the business wouldn't have been able to understand how the best customers, or those with the highest potential future value, were using the product. So in terms of whether it was helping drive future value, they would be in the dark. Now, ultimately, we were able to influence that and get some changes made, but it was really hard work convincing some people that the tech solution needed to be bigger than originally designed.
So they were building technology without even thinking about the data that they would need to measure success. Now, that's a classic disconnect.
Yeah, exactly. And in this example, I think that disconnect was similar to the point I made earlier. So more focus on building the immediate product than the future commercial implications. But as I say, we were ultimately able to overcome this through communication. And then, at other times, I've had my data team working alongside the tech team with the data professionals involved in all elements, from choosing the tech solution to measuring the impact and future value. And it was much smoother with both teams learning from each other and ultimately, developing a better product.
Now, that sounds like the ideal setup, like when both teams are involved from the very beginning.
Exactly. And I think, a few years ago, we had the big data science trend, didn't we, where data finally, felt front and centre after being a background department for far too long. And I think we're now seeing a similar thing happening with developers. Where developers are now being the group everyone wants more of. But in reality, we need both working together to develop better products for customer experience.
That's a great point about needing both data and tech working together. You mentioned that you have been on the board of a local photography gallery. How does using data in a non-profit context differ from the commercial work that you have done?
Yeah, I mean, of course, not everyone is trying to make money. It's just the vast majority of my work experience has been in the commercial space. But as you say, for the last 18 months, I've been on the board of a local not-for-profit photography gallery. Been working with them to use data to improve customer experience in a much less direct but equally important way. By using it to help make the case for funding, by showing the impact we've had from the exhibitions and the community work we've already done.
One follow-up here, Lindsay. The photography gallery work is really interesting. How do you measure impact in a cultural context versus a commercial one? Like, what does success then look like when it's not about revenue?
So for us, it's about so much more than footfall, which is the obvious thing to measure when you have a physical gallery space. And of course that is important. But we also measure our reach in terms of things like the number and type of projects, both inside the gallery and in the community. And then also the variety of communities we work with, which includes lower socioeconomic areas, refugees and asylum seekers and young people. And then also the number of artists we support and the number of partners we have, which enable us to scale our impact through the funding they then bring. So all of this together means we can estimate our operating costs in terms of a cost per visit and a cost per participant, and using that to show current and potential funders that we can offer a great return for the money spent. So some of the work myself and other board members are doing is helping the gallery teams to present this information in a digestible format, to show really easily the impact when we're applying for funding and attracting new partners.
Very exciting, very exciting. Uh, Moving slightly on the human side or human element, Lindsay, you know that one thing that I've always remembered about you is how loved you were as a leader. People genuinely wanted to work with you. That's rare. When you think about leadership, about building teams and creating that kind of an environment, what really matters to you? Like, what's the value or principle that guides you when you lead?
Oh, firstly, thanks for saying that. It is really, really nice to hear. And I should add for everyone that, when we worked together at HSBC, we had such an amazing team, which it was a pleasure to lead and who made my job much, much easier. I think the main thing, and it might sound basic, I guess, because it is that I try to enable people. And there are several layers to this. So firstly, I don't think anyone wants to just be told what to do. That's really boring, isn't it? And as analysts or data scientists, we're naturally curious people. We want to find things out for ourselves and learn. So I've tried never to do that. And then taking that further, embracing the ideas people have, whether for an existing piece of analysis or an idea for something new. Often when you're in a leadership role, you're not as close to the data as your team, and it's highly likely that team members are more technically able than you. And that was definitely true of us in HSBC, as it was a pretty big team. So accepting that, being open to ideas, whether they be a different approach or a new technology, I think is really crucial.
That takes humility, like acknowledging that your team might be more technically skilled than you.
Well, maybe, but it is true. And in fact, when I moved to my last role, I was starting a data team from scratch, so I was the first person in. And a fair few of my former team members were saying things to me like, "Oh, but who's going to do the analysis?" Which I thought was quite funny. And I was saying, well, I can still code, and of course I could, and I did. And then over time, as I grew the team, again, some of them technically surpassed me, which is fine. And I've also, in my time, managed data engineers, which is a role I've personally never done. Yet I just understood enough about what they do, and of course what I need them to do. And I also believe, being open with your team as much as you can is a good thing. So obviously, there's always going to be some things as a leader that you can't share, but things like business strategy and performance, you always can. So helping your team interpret those and specifically how they can contribute to them is key. So I always keep my team as informed as I can and encourage debate too, as that helps. I think it helps people feel more engaged and in turn leads to bigger contributions as well.
Transparency breeds engagement. I really like that.
Yeah, it's a good phrase. I think I'll use that in future. And I know it's how I work best as well when I'm engaged. And then I think as a leader, I can help clear the path for people. So whether that's keeping them informed and engaged, as I just said, or using my experience and knowledge of stakeholders to help them develop their own relationships. So that includes things like personalities, how someone thinks, what their priorities and the focuses of their own team are. And also bringing people into meetings, where they can hear from stakeholders directly, encouraging them to take part and in time have their own direct relationships. I don't believe in hierarchy. Anyone who's contributing is welcome, as I think you get the best results by including all voices rather than just senior people discussing things and passing on instructions. And when team members can then essentially take over stakeholder relationships, it in turn frees up more of your time as a leader to focus on other areas, so it's a win-win.
So you're essentially making yourself less necessary over time by empowering them. That's noble leadership and needs a lot of courage.
Well, I think it's essential as a major part of the leader's role is people development, isn't it? And while you say noble, I'll slightly counter that by saying, if your team does well, it reflects well on you. So there is a personal benefit to it as well. And several times I've given this advice to people managers in my team, particularly when they're starting to manage people for the first time. As I think when you're new to it, it can be tempting, can't it, to micromanage, as you think you're responsible for everything someone does. But by guiding and helping people grow, basically when they look good, you look good, yeah. And then next I'd say, enabling people, enable team members by being a gatekeeper when needed, to help them prioritize or push back and not become overwhelmed by, a sheer volume of work. I think that's also really important because your team need to know that the leader has their back and will help them focus on what they need to be doing to support the business strategy and their own development. And then finally, you really need to understand your team. Everyone's different, and so the way you interact with them, therefore, also needs to be different. So learning how to communicate with each team member is key for you to learn how to enable them. how do they like to be managed? What's the best one-to-one format for them? So essentially what I mean is, you need to adapt your style to suit individual personalities and ways of working in order to enable each person to grow and develop.
You mentioned adapting your style to each team member. Like, can you give me an example of two very different people that you have managed and how you adapted your approach to enable each of them?
Yeah. I'll give you a very simple example of adapting one-to-one formats to two very different direct reports. One of them was very much like me. In fact, we'd done one of those, personality tests, and she and I were exactly the same type. So in our one-to-one chats, before anything else, we'd talk about how they were feeling, life in general, what was going on at home, where we were going on holiday, even, things like that. As you know, I do like to chat. And then only after we were all caught up would we get onto the work side. And then in contrast, the other person really needed to talk about the work first. So bring in their progress and where they needed my support. And then only after that was done would we have a more general chat about how they were. So both formats covered both the work and the person, but they were led by their preferences and not mine, because as we know, the one-to-ones belong to the individual, not the manager.
Very helpful. And as you were sharing this example, I was trying to relate. Maybe if I had similar experience, and I could connect to the very similar situation that you just talked about, the personality that maybe matched. Like, I am the second kind of a guy. Lindsay, the example that you shared, that I will straight away jump to the work discussion. I mean, again, that's how I am. But I have also kind of interacted with folks, of course, you, and there are some members as well in my team who would first prefer to start the conversation at a lighter note, personal side. Again, there is nothing right or wrong in this. This is how different human beings are. But I know I get it. So we really need to understand. First point that you said, that the one-to-one is meant for the individuals and not for me as a leader. And second, I need to make an effort to first understand what works for that individual, and accordingly need to customize the conversation. No, that's
Exactly. And for each person, it might differ at different times in their career as well, mightn't it? And it's adapting to that, not just, oh, this is person A, this is how they like to work, and then that's how you do it forever. Being responsive to the work environment and their personal environment, and being open to adapting it over time as well, really key.
No, totally agree. All right, Lindsay, let's do a quick round, like a few questions, just whatever comes to mind first. Ready?
Okay, I'm ready.
The first one is, what's a skill that's not on your resume but has been essential to your success as a leader?
I would say empathy. I think I'm quite good at understanding how people are feeling and thinking, and then being able to adapt to that.
Very true. Next, is there a book, movie, or a song that inspires you? Something that keeps you grounded?
Well, that's a really hard question. I do read an awful lot, mostly fiction. I'll mention a book I actually got for my birthday this year. It's called Factfulness. It's about how, if you actually look at the data, the facts, things aren't as bad as we might think in this world. Like comparing now to 30 or 40 years ago, a lower percentage of the world's population live in poverty, a higher percentage of girls get to go to school and finish school, and compared to 100 years ago, the number of deaths from natural disasters has less than halved. And it actually starts with a quiz, so you learn about your own biases first. And I got a pretty low score, as apparently most people do. So I think at a time when we are hearing lots and lots of negativity, reading this book and being reminded to think rationally and look at the facts was like a breath of fresh air.
Oh, very interesting concept of the book, Lindsay. Thank you for sharing. Third, what's one thing that you wish more people understood about using data to enhance human experience?
That data can be used for good, as long as obviously we have the right safeguards in place.
And last one, You have been described as one of the most loved leaders. That does not happen by accident. What's your philosophy on building teams and creating an environment where people thrive?
I think really simple, be the leader you want to have.
Makes sense. Appreciate you sharing those aspects. It's very helpful. This overall discussion for last 20-30 minutes has been a really wonderful experience. But before we wrap up, I want to ask you this. Maybe for someone listening who is either early in their data science career, maybe leading a team for the first time, what would you want them to take away from your 25 years in this field? Like, what matters most?
Okay. I honestly think it is building relationships. You know, you can be the most technically gifted person in the room, but if you can't communicate your vision to people, adapt to them, and be willing to learn from them, then, you know, you'll be making your life a lot harder than it needs to be. So focus on building relationships.
Great. Thank you so much, Lindsay. It's been really good to reconnect and hear about your journey. I appreciate you taking the time to share your insights with us today.
Well, thanks to you too as well. You know, it's been great to take part. I've really enjoyed it.
And to everyone listening, thank you for joining us on Beyond Resume. Next time, we will be diving into another fascinating conversation with a leader who is shaping the future of analytics and AI. Until then, keep learning, keep connecting, and remember, your career is more than what's on your resume.